This is the preparation video for the Desk-A-Sew Organiser bag by Country Cow Designs. So this is just a quick video to cover a few of the things you might need to know before you start making this bag. So the first thing that you want to do before you do anything else is print off your cutting chart and pattern pieces. The cutting chart has an imperial inches chart, but there's also a metric centimeters chart for those who use metric measurements. Your chart will have measurements for the fabric and the interfacing. Watch out, because in this pattern, the interfacing is cut smaller on a lot of the pattern pieces. This is really important because there's a lot of pockets, there's a lot of layers. We need to make sure that we keep those seams from getting too bulky. Once you've printed out your pattern pieces, before you even cut them out, check the test squares. Make sure that they match exactly. So the 2 inch by 2 inches should be perfect. If it's off just by a little bit, even say 3%, it's going to throw out all your pattern pieces. So just watch out for that. Make sure that it is correct. Your pattern pieces will look like this. Some of them will have dashed lines on for the interfacing, so just make sure you pay attention to that. Pattern piece A is for the exterior and the lining fabric. You want to cut your lining first, then you're going to cut out this section before you cut your exterior panels. The measurements on each pattern piece, they relate to the longest height and longest width measurements, so that's the total piece of fabric that you're going to need for that pattern piece. If you want to save on printing, all of these shaded pattern pieces, the grey ones, they are actually rectangles and can be cut just using the measurements here. All the pattern pieces include the seam allowance, and each pattern piece has a name, the number that you need to cut, a pattern reference, and then the measurements. You can use this chart. You can see perhaps that I've written different things like cork and grey and the different fabrics that I want to use for each thing, so you can use it for your fabric planning. And then once you've cut your piece out, you can tick it. If you use a heat erasable pen, then what you can do is once you're done, you can just wipe the iron over it and start again for your next bag. This is an advanced sewing pattern, and the seam allowance throughout is 1/4 of an inch. That's because we have lots of curves and zips. So we decided that 1/4 of an inch is going to be best. It's easier, more accurate for sewing the curves. When you're applying your interfacing, we recommend lightweight non-woven for all the interfacing, and as you can see, it's kept out of the seams on the pattern pieces. Each pattern piece has the layout for that. Please do pay attention to keeping it out of the seams. If you leave your interfacing in the seams, the bulk is going to build up very quickly. Even if your sewing machine can make it through the bulk, it's not necessarily going to look as good. If you want to use a heavier weight interfacing and your machine can handle it, you absolutely can. Some of the pattern testers used heavier interfacing, but again, they kept it out of the seams, so that's why it was okay. So I'm using this cotton canvas for the exterior. Cotton is a great fabric for the exterior of this bag. It's just going to make your life really easy when you're making the bag. It's going to make it a fun and enjoyable sew. If you want to go for a heavier fabric for the main panels, perhaps cork or vinyl, that's absolutely fine if your machine can handle it, but I do only recommend that for more advanced sewists. Adam made one using leather, and it was much harder to do the box corners. Also, if you're using a fabric that's slippery, that is also going to make your life harder when you're doing those box corners, so just bear that in mind. So for the exterior, I've got the cotton canvas, and then for this, which is pattern piece B, the slip pocket, 2 of those are in cork because I wanted cork behind here. If you want to skip these exterior slip pockets and you don't want them at all, you can just cut your exterior fabrics out like you do with the lining. If you're having grab handles, so the grab handles are going to be kind of popping up out of the pocket. If you are having those, you will need to use rivets. So if you're not using rivets, give the grab handles a miss, because we rivet through, which holds the whole pocket in place. If you don't do that, when you grab the handle, the whole pocket's going to kind of come out with it. For the lining, I recommend using different colour fabrics for each pocket. If you look at the layout photos in the pattern on page 4, you'll see a layout of all the different pockets that are in the pattern, and all of the pattern pieces are labelled. It makes it really easy to plan your fabrics. But if all your fabrics are the same for the lining, when you look into the bag, it's going to be more difficult to identify where the pockets are. This elastic is optional and is for a sort of pen and phone holder on the divider pocket, which I find quite handy. Again, all my pattern pieces are interfaced with the interfacing cut out of the seams as instructed in the cutting chart and the pattern pieces. I've also written the letter for each pattern piece on the back. That will make life a lot easier when you're trying to find the right pattern piece. Stabilizers. So for the main stabilizer, I am using Peltex. You could also use Decaville Heavy or something of a similar weight. If you're using a thicker fabric, cork, vinyl, leather, something like that, maybe you want to reduce to a slightly more lightweight interfacing of stabilizer, but that's up to you. It depends on the fabrics that you're using, but for me, I love having the Peltex. It gives the bag a nice amount of structure, regardless of what fabric I'm using. For the pockets and the grab handles, I'm using Decaville Light because we just want to give them a little bit more reinforcement so that these pockets can be used for things like documents, and the pocket's not just going to kind of crumple. For your zips, you will need to use continuous nylon zip tape or continuous zip tape. A pre-made zip isn't going to work for the construction method that we're using on this bag. So I've got my zips all cut out. Again, that is all referenced in the cutting chart. Everything you need to prepare is referenced here: webbing, elastic, zip tape. So I've also got my crossbody strap, my grab handles, and then I've got all of my hardware and zips. If you really want to reduce the pockets in this pattern, the magazine pocket and the card slot pocket can be removed without any problem, but you will need to keep the divider pocket and the zip pocket. These are all of the tools that I'm going to be using to make this bag. You don't need all of these tools, but they are going to make your life easier. So I've got a variety of different size quilting rulers. That's going to be quite handy. Then I've got some double-sided tape, which is going to help hold a few things in place while we're sewing, and some Fabri-Tac Beacon fabric glue. That's quite handy too. To treat the end of my zips and my nylon webbing, I've got a lighter, or you could use fray check. And then to fit the rivets, I've got a rivet hole punch. I've also got a Japanese hole punch and a little mini cutting mat for punching rivets. That's really handy for accessing more difficult places. Wander clips for holding everything in place. A pair of sharp fabric scissors, a pair of small scissors for threads and things. Pinking shears for the curves, that will make it a little bit easier to get them to lay flat. I'm using Microtex needles, size 90. These are great when you're working with things like double-sided tape because they have a coated surface that means that they don't kind of get stuck to your tape. Got a zipper foot for my sewing machine to get into close spaces, as well as the standard foot that's already on the machine. Got my screwdriver for changing over my needles and sewing feet. I have got a biro pen. Now be careful with this. Don't let it go near your fabrics. This is for marking the zip tape. It's very important that we mark the zip tape before we start, so just pay attention in the pattern to when we're marking it. I use a biro because I do not want those marks to disappear under any circumstances, and I can't risk it with a heat erasable pen. I've also got a turning tool for just pushing out the corners and things of the pockets. You could use a chopstick if you don't have one of these. And I've got an erasable fabric pen for when I do need to mark the fabric where it's going to be seen. Lastly, to fit the rivets, I've got my rivet hand press. So mine is attached to a block of wood. Mine's quite a lightweight one, so this is really good to have it attached to wood. But if you've got a more high-end one, you will probably find that it's fine without. But I'm going to use this to set the rivets. Alternatively, if you don't have one, you could use a hand setting rivet tool